So in this last video here, now we're going to explore a little more challenging type of solving equation type of problem. Again, we are still solving it over the first lap of the unit circle. Here in this one, as you can see, we've got a sine squared and we've got a cosine. The downfall of this one is I've got this -3 hanging off there at the end, so I can't just factor something out and set those two parts equal to 0 like we were doing before. I gotta go about this one a different way. And the different way that we're going to use is we're going to utilize our identities. I know that sine squared is 1 minus cosine squared of x. So let's switch it into that. Now at least I've got all cosines in my equation. When I distribute, then I get 2 minus 2 cosine squared of x plus 3 cosine of x minus 3 equals 0. So if I combine like terms, make it look nice, -2 cosine squared of x plus 3 cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. Now me, I'm not a fan of having a negative lead coefficient on my problems, so I would probably make this become, multiply everything by -1, 2 cosine squared of x minus 3 cosine of x plus 1 equals 0. If we took this whole equation here and multiplied it by -1. Now what we can do is now we can come up with our two sets of parentheses. One of them is going to be 2 cosine of x. The other one's going to be cosine of x. I want to get, my only choices over here are 1 and 1. They got to be the same, and they're both going to be minus. Quick check. 2 cosine times cosine gets me 2 cosine squared. -2 cosine of x on the outsides minus cosine of x on the insides gets me -3 cosines of x. -1 times -1, +1. Woohoo, rock on. Okay, so then we get 2 cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. Now I can set those two factors equal to 0. Solve. So I'm first looking where cosine of x is equal to 1/2. Go to your unit circle. Cosine 1/2 happens at pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. Then I'm also looking for where cosine is equal to 0, or excuse me, cosine is equal to 1, because that was my other one, and that happens at 0. So go back here, scroll on down. So this gives me 0, pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3 as my 3 answers. In this next one, I've got a secant and a cosine, but again, unfortunately, I have an extra term of a 2 sitting out there, so that's not going to help me. Okay? So, however, if I'm thinking about getting them into one trig function, well, secant here is 1 over cosine times 3 minus cosine of x equals 2. Now, to clear that fraction, I can take this entire equation and multiply it by cosine. So I would have to multiply there by cosine, and into that term by cosine. So 3 times 1 over cosine times cosine is just 3. Cosine times cosine is cosine squared. 2 times cosine is cosine. Now I've got a nice equation with all cosines in it. Let's get everything onto one side. That means it's going to be 0 equals cosine squared of x after I added it over to the other side. 2 cosine of x is already here. Subtract 3 from both sides gets me to there. Now I can factor cosine of x and cosine of x. I need two numbers that multiply together to be -3 and add to be +2, thinking algebraic like. So that is how this one would factor. Cosine of x plus 3, cosine of x minus 1. Quick check. Cosine times cosine gets me cosine squared. Cosine times -1 is negative cosine. 3 times cosine is 3 cosine. Negative cosine plus 3 cosine is 2 cosine. And +3 times -1 is -3. Factored out, great. Leaves me with, now I can set my two factors equal to 0. Cosine of x plus 3 equals 0. Gives me cosine of x equals -3. Cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. Gives me cosine of x is equal to 1. Checking my unit circle. 3, not on it. Okay, a cosine value of 3, not on it, so that one's not possible. But however, a cosine value of 1 happens at 0 in my first lab. So that, this part, let me extend my page just a little bit. This part is not possible. And this one gets me x is 0. So that's just my answer, is 0.